Good morning. Thank you for joining us for our coffee conversation with the experts. My name is Stacy Boland. I'm the Director of Outreach for Area Agency on Aging. And I'm joined this morning with my colleague, Charity Dara, who is the Vaccine Outreach Coordinator. Before we start the presentation, just wanted to let you know that feel free to put your questions in the chat bar below. We will do our best to answer as many questions at the end of the presentation as possible. And without further ado, I will turn this over to Charity.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Our first presenter is Sharlene Edwards, Disease Control Director at the Department of Health in Pinellas County. I'll allow her to briefly introduce herself. Charlene, you can begin whenever you're ready.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Sharlene Edwards, and I am the Disease Control Director here at the Department of Health in Pinellas County. I'm just going to talk briefly about, COVID-19 and where we are right now and what's happening now and what's on the horizon. So COVID-19 is still very active in our community. Still the same is that close contact with others less than 6 feet increases your chances of coming in contact with someone that has COVID and being exposed to COVID. And you don't have to be visibly sick to spread COVID-19. And that's something that over the last year and a half, we've come to understand and realize. Protections continue. Now we have a vaccine, so it's very important to get vaccinated. Avoiding crowded places and physical distancing from others, especially if they are visibly sick, is always a great idea. Wearing a mask, especially if in a crowded area where you cannot physically distance, is always a good idea. Washing your hands and sanitizing your hands often is the #1 way to decrease your exposure to other communicable diseases. And keeping sick at home. If you're not feeling well, if you're feeling under the weather, it's always a good idea to stay home until you feel better. So what's new? So I think we're, on the downward end of this most recent wave that was caused by the Delta variant. So, there have been 4 variants of concern in the United States. There's been the Alpha, the Beta, the Gamma, and the Delta. The Delta by far is the most contagious of the variants. The Delta variant is very highly contagious and 2 times as contagious as the previous variants that we saw last spring. In 2020, when we first were introduced to the COVID virus. Delta variant might cause more severe illness. Patients infected with the Delta variant are more likely to be hospitalized than those who were affected with maybe the Alpha or one of the original variants. Unvaccinated people are of greatest concern. And even now, because of increased hospitalizations and death of COVID-19 from the Delta variant of those who are unvaccinated. So, that's the concern right now is the Delta variant, and it's been primarily responsible for this last wave that we saw between July and late September. So what's new? As of August 23rd, 2021, the FDA fully approved the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine for those 16 and over. In addition to that, we have new approvals for the 3rd dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, as well as the booster dose for the COVID-19 vaccine. So a lot of people ask, well, what is the difference? What's the difference between the 3rd dose and the booster dose? Aren't they the same? Well, the vaccine is the same. However, the reasons that we give it are just a little bit different. So for the 3rd dose, we're looking at an extra dose that's actually part of the original 2-dose series. People with moderately or severe, who are moderately or severely compromised, especially those who are vulnerable to COVID-19, they may not build up the same level of immunity to the 2-dose series as those who are not immunocompromised. So this 3rd dose is actually part of that initial 1st dose series. And so they need that extra dose in order to reach the initial level of immunity that others received after 2 doses. So that's the reason for the third dose. Now, a booster dose is a dose of the COVID-19 that's separate from the original 2-dose series. So you took your 2-dose series, you've reached your maximum level of immunity, and some time has passed since you received those 2 doses. And so maybe that immunity is weakening, or you need some extra protection for this new Delta variant. So this dose, this booster dose, is given after a certain amount of time after you've received the first 2-dose series. And it's sort of a reminder dose. It's order to remind your immune system, hey, remember, there's still that virus out there, and I just want you to remember. And so it's to boost your immunity from the time that had passed from your second dose. So who gets a third dose? So the CDC recommends that people who are moderately to severely immunocompromised gets a third dose at least 28 days after the second dose if they receive Pfizer or Moderna. Since this third dose is part of the initial series, it is recommended that you get the same vaccine for all 3 doses. So the CDC recommends those who have active cancer treatments, organ transplant, stem cell transplant, moderate to severe immunodeficiency, advanced or untreated HIV, treatment with high dose steroids. All of these are good categories for those who might need a third dose, again, because they did not reach the level of immunity after the 2-dose series. So, if you feel like you fall into this category, it's a great idea to talk to your healthcare provider about your current medical conditions and whether or not a third dose would be right for you. Booster dose. So for a booster dose, this is recommended for anybody who's 65 and older, regardless of underlying conditions. If you're 18 plus with underlying health conditions, or live in a long-term care setting, or in a high-risk setting like a hospital, or where you're likely to come in contact with those who have COVID, a booster dose is recommended. If you receive Pfizer or Moderna, it's recommended after at least 6 months after you've had your 2-dose series. If you got the Janssen vaccine, it's recommended that you get a booster at least 2 months after the initial shot. Again, this is a reminder dose. That means to remind your system that, hey, remember COVID, to provide you with extra protections and to reboost your immunity. You may have heard a lot about the monoclonal antibody therapy. And this is antibody therapy that can help prevent severe illness, hospitalization, or death among those who are at highest risk. So who's at highest risk? Those who are 65 years of age or older, obese, or those being overweight, pregnancy, chronic kidney disease, if you have diabetes, severely immunocompromised, any type of cardiovascular disease, chronic lung disease, even asthma. This antibody treatment would be great for you if you unfortunately have come in contact with COVID and are exhibiting symptoms. Right now, it's available widely across Florida in Pinellas County at the Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church in Clearwater. And it's for high-risk persons 12 and over with COVID or exposed to COVID. And at this time, the treatment is free. So just a little bit of a breakdown about what exactly the monoclonal antibody does. So normally when your body comes in contact with what we call a foreign invader, it builds up antibodies, and those antibodies work to neutralize this invader. Normally this process can take some time. So you come in contact with it, your body has to recognize it, and then send out some information in order to fight against that. And so this immunity can take up some time. So with COVID, because time is of the essence, and that time that it takes for your body to mount up a response, especially if you're unvaccinated, can be detrimental. And so the monoclonal antibody therapy is to give you those antibodies that your body would naturally produce, but to give it to you sooner so that you can neutralize that invader sooner, so that you can prevent severe illness or possibly death. So just a side-by-side comparison of the antibody therapy versus a vaccine. So the antibody therapy, again, is a protein that binds to that virus. So it sort of works faster than your body's natural immune response. In contrast, the vaccine is like a piece of the virus that your immune system sort of recognizes before you're even exposed. The antibody therapy is more to treat those who are already infected, as the versus the vaccine, which sort of trains your body to recognize that virus when it becomes exposed to it. You should get the antibody therapy as soon as you find out that you have it, if you want to prevent severe illness, and it starts to work almost immediately. The vaccine, on the other hand, your body builds up an immune response about 1 to 2 weeks after you give it. Again, it's supposed to work before you come into contact with the virus. Antibody therapy is short-lived. It's quick. It's not meant to be long-lived, and it only really is for weeks to months. Whereas the vaccine can last, and at this point, we're seeing that with the COVID-19, 6 to 8 months later, you still have pretty good immune response. And so there's a difference between getting the antibody therapy for quick response in order to prevent severe illness and hospitalization right now versus a vaccine to help your body build up in a response earlier before you come in contact, that will help you prevent severe illness and hospitalization later if you did come in contact with COVID-19. So what's to come? Right now, we're in full flu season for the 2021-2022 flu season. I encourage everyone to get vaccinated. You probably saw a lot of reports that last year during the 2020-2021 flu season that we virtually didn't have a flu season. And a lot of that was due to safer at home measures, more masking requirements, and people doing more social distancing last year. And so not only were we able to keep the COVID levels down, but also flu levels. So now that things across the country have opened back up, we don't have as many mask requirements. We're anticipating that we're probably going to see a resurgence of our flu season back to the levels that it was before COVID. And so we highly encourage everyone to get vaccinated early. Peak flu season is usually between January and February is when we see the most cases. Again, just like with the COVID vaccine, it takes about 2 weeks for your body to build up a good immune response. So we encourage people to get vaccinated before the holidays. So get vaccinated now. That way you're ready for your families, you're ready for peak flu season. Possible additional FDA approvals for Moderna and Janssen, that might be in the works. Right now, only Pfizer's FDA fully approved, and Moderna and Janssen still working under EUA. Are there more COVID variants coming? You know, who's to say? You know, COVID is a slippery virus. So the more it transmits, the more that it has a chance to mutate. And so there could be more variants in our future. So, you know, the idea is to decrease the transmission so that we can decrease the chances of these variants popping up. New ways of doing life. I don't go anywhere without my mask. I think that we're just sort of entering into a new era of how we protect ourselves personally and those around us. So I think that, you know, that's where we are right now with, you know, wearing masks in public places. We're seeing more, which I love to see, more hand sanitizer stations popping up, more hand washing stations popping up. So that's always a good thing. And just doing everything that we can to protect ourselves and those around us. I do want to share some resources that I love to use. Locally, if you're here in Pinellas County has a great resource for testing, vaccinations, monoclonal antibody, and what's happening here in the county. If you want to look at what the state's doing, the Florida Department of Health has a great COVID response page. If you want to see what's happening in your county, in your area, this is a great place to start. And then if you want to look at some guidance or educational tools, if you want to look at what the CDC is saying, we base all of our recommendations off of CDC. So that's always a great place to go if you want to know, you know, the hard and fast rules for what's happening. And I think we're going to save the questions to the end, I think. So that just ends my portion. And so I'll turn it back over to Charity.
Thank you so much, Charlene. That was very helpful. We appreciate that. Great information there. Our second presenter is Dr. Kevin Sneed, who is the Dean and Professor at USF Tunisia College of Pharmacy. I'll allow him to introduce himself and continue with his presentation. Dr. Sneed, you can start whenever you're ready.
Okay, Charity, thank you very much, and Ms. Edwards, outstanding presentation, great information, and Stacy, I just want to thank you as well for the invitation. What I'm going to try and do, and I'm going to try and do it as quickly as I can, so as they often say when you get onto the airline, buckle up and hold on tight. I'm going to try and bring you all into my scientific world a little bit and give a little bit more explanation and background as to why we want you to go and get vaccinated. Things that very often people, you can't hear on the 6 o'clock news or on social media with Twitter and Facebook. And so let me share my presentation. And again, I'm going to try and go fairly quickly, and so that we can have a really nice question and answer session. And to start off, I have just a very, very brief video to share with you. And I think you all can see that. It explains a little bit about the virus. Okay, so in that video that we just showed you, again, the most dangerous portion of the actual virus is that RNA strand is right there in the middle of it. And because when it gains entry into the cells of your body, it kind of takes over the machinery of your body fully for the purpose of replicating and pulling your protein so it can repackage itself and then reemerge and go off and infect another part of your body. Now, something that I've really spent a lot of time on over the past 3 months has been really understanding the role of what we call the non-structural proteins. And I'm going to explain that here in great detail in just a moment. So I'm going to share two things with you that you've probably never heard or probably kind of heard but didn't really appreciate all the way. The non-structural proteins that come from that RNA strand inside of your body when it soaks into your cell, they actually break up into 16 different parts. And what I've really been exploring are 3 of them, what we call NSP1, 6, and 13. Their exclusive job is to actually go into your body and try to evade. Now, the scientific word that we use is evade, but for you all, I'm going to say it actually helps to deactivate your body's early alert immune system. And so it gains, the virus will gain entry into your body, begin replicating for about a 3 to 5 day period before you even knew it was there, before your body had a chance to respond. Now, this is not uncommon for viruses, but I'm going to show you here in a moment how this particular coronavirus has evolved over a period of time. So again, I talked about the 16 non-structural proteins, and eventually when your body does realize exactly what happened, it has a very strong response to that. And so now your immune system kicks into high gear, but it does so with these internal inflammatory proteins. And it has been the inflammatory proteins that wind up causing a lot of damage in the lungs and causing that pneumonia that we find. But also, in addition to all of that, and I'll just put this in here just to show you that this is not my opinion. This is through very scientific fact. This is part of a scientific presentation I give to other scientists to really begin to hone in on what are the genes and other components in our body that this virus has now learned how to deactivate. And so when we think about the coronavirus, and we call it COVID-19 because of 2019, but you all may remember the original SARS. But what has really happened is that from the time that we had that original SARS, it has mutated and evolved, and it added in another role for one of those non-structural proteins that has now made it far more dangerous and has now made the coronavirus of 2019 or COVID-19 far more dangerous and spread much more around the world, far more than the original SARS back in 2002 ever did. So I'll come back and I want to share this with you again because as we heard from Ms. Edwards, the Delta variant, it replicates 1,000 times quicker and 1,000 times more than any other previous version than the original version of COVID-19 from back in 2020. And so what has begun happening, and really we have to keep in mind, I'll show you here in a moment, is that when you get infected with the Delta variant, it will overwhelm your immune system because it still has the capability of kind of hiding out in your body, in your nasal pharynx and getting down into your lungs before your body even knew it happened. And so here I'll begin to show exactly how, let me kind of speed this up for time's sake. Again, as we heard Ms. Edwards say, your body, many people say, well, you know, if I get naturally infected, my immune system is really strong, it's going to kick in. Well, that's not really true because, you know, your body has to make antibodies according to the virus that has actually infected it. And so what has wound up happening is that it takes about a week for your body to just begin the process of actually trying to build up the antibodies against, and in this case, the coronavirus. But remember, the Delta variant is now replicating 1,000 times more than when we published this data back in May of 2020. And this is part of what has made the Delta variant so much more dangerous. Now, the other myth I want to dispel, this is not a respiratory virus. Let me repeat that. This is not the flu, okay? It is not a respiratory virus. It is more of what I call a cardiovascular virus, meaning the only attachment points it can show. And let me go back for a quick moment. If you look up here in the top corner, you find these words on ACE2 receptor, and we kind of saw that in the video clip. Your body has ACE2 receptors all throughout your body in the organs that fill the cavity of the human body and in the blood vessels of your body. And when the virus attaches on to these particular organs, we find out why we wind up having this organ damage and not just lung damage. Again, it can attach onto your heart. I did a conference with a liver transplant surgeon that told me that now they're having to do liver transplants for people that got infected with COVID-19 because the COVID-19 virus damaged the liver. We have a large number of people that had kidney injuries that were in the hospital. We had a large number of people that had intestinal tract issues. We had people, of course, you've heard about the lung, but the blood clotting. And this particular virus has a good skill to go crawl along your olfactory nerve in your nose. It can knock out your ability to smell, but then climb into your brain. And so we are not talking about just your normal virus in terms of like another flu. This is a far different beast than anything that the flu ever was. Now, for people that have what we call chronic conditions, if you have high blood pressure, if you are diabetic, if you fall into the overweight or obese category, just by having that health condition, you are already primed to have an inflammatory condition internal because of those conditions. If you become infected with the actual virus, it can now rev up those inflammatory proteins, leading to further damage. And so what you're looking at here, that we're just showing that if diabetes can damage the organ, there's a role for the COVID-19 virus to come in and damage the very same organ. So again, we're not talking about a respiratory virus. We really are talking about something far more deleterious to the cardiovascular system. Now, we hear a lot about children. I just want to touch on it very briefly. When we talk about children, number one, their early innate immune system is actually superior to that of adults, and that's a good thing. That's number one. And then number two, they don't have a very mature cardiovascular system. So they don't have the receptors for the virus to attach onto at the same rate that we do as adults. However, because of the Delta variant, they do have receptors and it can evade their early immune system. And therefore, children being little people, little human beings, we have found that now with the emergence of the Delta variant, far more children have gone into the hospital and become ill than what we initially had. And so, yes, children can become infected and they can actually bring it home and they can infect either their parents or their grandparents. So again, we just want to make sure that we have an understanding of the immune system in children and what winds up happening. So as we heard before, I'm going to talk about a little bit and very quickly about the Delta variant and show you exactly how dangerous it has been. Number one, all of the variants that we're concerned about did not originate here in the United States. That's one quick fact. Delta did not originate here in the United States, but it traveled here very quickly. Number two, we find that it had far more mutations of that spike protein than any of the other variants, and it learned how to get into our body a little bit better than any other version of the coronavirus. So again, let me repeat that. Along the way, it has learned how to infect our body even more than any of the previous versions of it. So let me show you how quickly it spread and how transmissible it is. Remember, keeping in mind, it replicates at 1,000 times the rate of the original version of the coronavirus. So around the country, the Delta variant is shown in kind of the dark orange bar here. And so at one point, it was only 2.8% of all the infections across the country. And then it went up to about 10% in early June. And then just to kind of move forward in early October, it became literally 99.9% of all detected viruses across the entire country. And most recently, and from 10/23 earlier this week, when the report came out, it was down to 99.6, I believe. Yep, 99.6 of all cases out there. And so now let me go back for a minute because Ms. Edwards made a very, very key statement that I want to allude to. On here, you find other variants out there. And I'm going to show you exactly how we categorize them here in a moment. And when they are present here in the United States, but Delta has crowded out everything else. So the most dangerous version of the virus through variant mutation is now crowding out everything else. So really we are focusing much energy, but what we have found is that the current vaccines are effective against the Delta variant. We have to keep that in mind. And so here, let me just get through this very quickly. The World Health Organization, they keep a track of all of the variants anywhere in the entire world. And they share all that information. So scientists all over the world and scientists from Quest Labs and LabCorp and academic centers like USF, we're all tracking all of it and we share the information. And when we find, and so mutations and variants are not uncommon. They happen all the time. And the overwhelming majority have no change and no difference on how they infect us. But when we do find one that may be a little bit more dangerous or have a little bit more transmissibility, we do track them and then we let people know. And so here we talk about Delta, but we also are keeping a very close eye on Lambda and Mu. And there are other variants out there, but I don't have time to talk about them. But here the green part is how the Delta variant has taken over everything across the United States of America. So it really is the most dangerous and the only one that we're concerned about across the entire country right now. So now, why are we talking about boosters? Well, we actually have data to support and provide to the FDA and the CDC as to why we wanted people to get boosters. We found that over time, that people's effectiveness, and they had a waning effectiveness against the actual virus. Now, the Delta variant actually had a lot to do with that, believe it or not. And so we did find here that we had a waning effect of the Moderna vaccine and a waning effect of the Pfizer vaccine. It went from 75% all the way down to 42% effectiveness at the Mayo Clinic. So here I just wanted to kind of show that, you know, while we talk about all of the vaccines, there are a large number of other therapeutics, especially if you wind up sick and you go in the hospital. Really, I think Ms. Edwards did a great job talking about the monoclonal antibodies, and we can have that more of a Q&A. On the very bottom, you find two, one rather controversial in the way of ivermectin, and then one medication from Merck that is actually seeking emergency use authorization right now, called molnupiravir. And the molnupiravir, what it winds up doing, it kind of frustrates the virus and does not allow it to repackage and then replicate all the way. Okay, so it kind of inserts a false signal and it kind of makes it start over. And so if any of you have ever been a cashier and you were counting your stack of ones and you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I used to come along when I worked at the movie theater and I would tell my friend, he would say 1, 2, 3, 4, and I would say 10, 12, 15, 20. And then they would get confused and then they have to start over. And then I would go and I would do it to the next person. Well, that's kind of what happens with the molnupiravir, with the new medication that we're trying to get. It's an oral medication. It prevents the virus from continuing to replicate. And therefore, and that works in a very similar fashion, not identical, but similar fashion as the remdesivir that's given by IV for people that go into the hospital. Now, the ivermectin story, we can have a little bit Q&A about that, but the long and the short of it is that we have a lot of agents out there that show the ability in a petri dish to be able to inhibit the virus. But what we have not had that do is when you take it into the body across a large number of people, to have it be able to inhibit the replication of the virus in the same rate without causing toxicity. The dose of what we find in the petri dish cannot be replicated for most human beings. It winds up causing more damage and toxicity long before it winds up knocking out the virus. So we want you to have antibodies to bind onto the virus long before you have that problem. Now, I know you all think, you know, I don't want to take the vaccine because, you know, it came about too quickly. Just want to tell you, we have been studying mRNA vaccines for a long time. And the current vaccines that are out there really emanated from cancer research vaccines way back in the 1990s and the early 2000s. And we have tracked and we've been injecting people with mRNA vaccines now for almost 30 years. And so when it came time, this might be the first time we have put it on the market because we have really stepped up exactly how we know the safety profile, we know the efficacy profile, and the manufacturing profile. We had all three. So I just want to help you all understand, but I'm just showing this to you right now. Look at the dates of the time that the articles were published, 2013, 2016, and we had a Zika vaccine that was 97% effective against Zika, but Zika went away so quickly that Moderna never had a chance to put it on the market. So no, the vaccines are not new. They were not studied. They were not rushed. And you know, imagine where we would be. All people want to know, what's in the vaccine? Well, you know what? A lot of stuff you find in your kitchen. If you look here at the ingredients outside of lipid or cholesterol, which many of us consume every day, potassium chloride, which is what you find in the Miss Dash salt substitute, sodium chloride, which many of us consume too much, me included, and then sucrose. And that's what's in the vaccine, nothing more. And the mRNA strand that is synthetically made. So we have to make sure, very same thing for the Moderna vaccine, by the way, no preservatives. And when you are injected, and within a 12 to 24-hour period, everything we injected in your arm is already dissolved and your body has broken it down and removed it. I do want to, the final slide I'm going to show here really talks about, well, what can happen. We've heard a lot about myocarditis, but we have determined that for the small number of people that get that condition, that the benefit far outweighs the risk of 4 out of 100,000 people that wind up with that condition. And by the way, COVID-19 can cause the very same condition. For the overwhelming majority of people, if they get it, if you are a young male, and you get this condition, it will go away within about a week, and it does not leave permanent damage. But if you get infected with COVID-19, it will not be gone in a week, and you will have potentially long-term ramifications, heart arrhythmias, myocarditis, and through cardiac MRI, we know that there may be permanent damage from COVID-19. And so my last slide here is really just showing why do we want, I think Ms. Edwards did a wonderful job. Please go to the website she mentioned and get the information. But when you get that third dose or the booster, your body has memorized and said, you know what, I've seen it before, and we get a large amount of antibodies, and we want those antibodies on board before you become infected. As I mentioned before, your body does not know that you've been infected. And with the Delta variant, it will overwhelm your immune system very rapidly. And therefore, we want to have antibodies already circulating to bind it so it cannot replicate, because replication of the virus in your body can lead to very bad health outcomes, hopefully, but hopefully not, but including death. We don't want that to occur. I'm going to turn it back over to Charity, the hostess with the mostest, and I look forward to any questions that you all may have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sneed, for that very helpful scientific vantage point. We appreciate that. We will now segue into our Q&A segment of our webinar. I can start us off with the first question, but feel free to please put any of your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. As you may know, at AAA-PP, we primarily work with seniors, caregivers, and individuals with disabilities. So in your opinion, and this is open to both of our panelists, how can we work to better engage individuals in our community who may not be as enthusiastic about getting vaccinated or receiving a booster shot if that's what's recommended for them? And also, how have you as a professional worked to earn that confidence about these topics within your respective organizations?
I'll go ahead and I'll just say that for us here at the Department of Health, since the beginning of the vaccine distribution, we've tried to definitely work closer with the community, bringing vaccines into the long-term care facilities, also working with faith-based organizations, trusted community members, especially for those who are older. We found that a lot that have sort of center bases like the church or their synagogue or some type of trusted entity, it's best to work through those. We found that the friend telling a friend works really, really well. You know, bringing a friend. We had several, older persons who they couldn't wait to get back to their coffee dates with their favorite person. And so it was, hey, bring a friend along. We've since then have also tried to incentivize the community. We realized that COVID created a lot of hardships. So providing food coupons for those, getting their first shot, or maybe they got the first one and maybe that was a traumatizing experience and, they delayed getting the second one, incentivizing them to come back. But definitely working with, key gatekeepers, key trusted community members to sort of bring that person along has helped us.
I echo everything she just said, and we work with the Department of Health. Here in Hillsborough County, USF has worked very closely with Doug Holt and that group. And so I just echo everything. It's a community effort. We're all partnering together to get into as many areas as we can and provide as many services. And someone has a very important question I think we'll get to soon. We'll take Charity. We'll follow your lead here. But there are growing medical services that need to be originated as a response to COVID-19 that we just did not have before COVID-19 ever hit. So I'll be happy to address the question from Mary Haddon in just a moment.
Well, with that, we can definitely start with Mary, and then we'll work backwards to Larry after that, if that's okay. But go ahead, Dr. Sneed. Let's read off Mary's question. For those of us who have had COVID and experiencing long-term health challenges, where is the medical support primary physicians are not trained or informed. Not to put you on the hot seat or anything, but I mean, that's what this is all about. People have those kinds of questions, and I appreciate you, Mary, for asking it. And Dr. Sneed, I'm going to go right to you with that one.
You know, there is no hot seat when it comes to communicating with the public. So Mary, let me just say that here at USF and in conjunction with Tampa General Hospital, we have started a what we're calling a post-acute COVID or a long COVID clinic. Now, let me be very clear about what that means. We are trying the best we can to figure out, and if you look all around the country, institutions like Stanford University and their School of Medicine, we're all trying to figure out a little bit more about long COVID. But the long and the short of it is once the virus attaches onto the organs in your body and begins to replicate, we understand that will put into motion things that can lead to organ damage. It can lead to neurological challenges, psychological challenges, and it tends to be a little bit different for each individual. And so we're trying to figure out, number one, what is the pathophysiological, meaning what is the physical manifestation of what's happening in the body, so that hopefully we can come up with a solution that will help people. And so you are correct. Primary physicians, many people are not trained in it because you know what? COVID-19 never happened before at the scale that it happened. But that's why we have academic medical centers. That's why we have researchers. That's why we're doing a lot of research here at the university, so we can get to the bottom of the answers and try and provide more answers for all of our physicians across all communities to be able to treat people with long COVID in a much better fashion than we've been capable of doing up to this point.
Thank you. Charlene, do you want to add anything to that, or?
I echo everything Dr. Sneed said. One of the things I will say is that, and I'm so glad that Dr. Sneed brought up in his presentation about the origin of COVID, because, you know, that's been a big misconception that COVID is new, the vaccine is new, and it hadn't been studied. And I'm glad that you brought that up, that, you know, this SARS-CoV from 2002, so everything doesn't just happen in a bubble. So when things come up, and I thank God for these, you know, the scientists and the researchers and the people who stay on these things, right? So they never stop studying this. So, you know, that virus from the time it manifested has been studied and continued to be studied. And now we're finally at a point where we're able to marry it with the technology of mRNA. So it's kind of a great time for present day science for two things that probably 10, 20 years ago didn't exist, that now independently being studied now exists. So now that we're experiencing everything from long COVID, those things are continued to be studied. So, you know, we'll have more information tomorrow than we had today and in a month from now. And so I do see that this is going to change how we train doctors, how we train nurses, looking at different evidence-based practices for dealing with COVID and long COVID. And so I think it will only get better. You know, a year and a half ago, we didn't have the information we have now. And so I would like to think that in a year from now, we'll have more information than we have today.
Charlene, while we have our attendees here, let me give you a provocative thought that I talk about with my great friend and virologist, Dr. Ting. I want to give you a thought. Can you imagine where we would be today if two things had happened? Number one, can you imagine if we did not have the technology of messenger RNA that we've been studying for a 25-year period? Okay, because the real utility is the fact that we can manufacture that relatively quickly. You know, people don't ever think about the fact we have to manufacture billions of doses. So think about the fact that if we had to wait to grow the virus in eggs and wait for a year, so that's number one. And then the other second provocative thought, can you imagine what could have happened if we had started off the pandemic with the Delta variant? So these are two thoughts that in the mind of how we operate in science and why we work with the level of urgency that we do. Because if we encounter something in another 5-year period, we want to be more prepared then than we are now. And this is how we think. So anyway, I just wanted to share, and thank you for your comments, and everything you said were just spot on.
No, I appreciate you both. Yeah. Charity, I was gonna see if we could go to Larry's question from earlier. Do you want to read that off,
Yes.
Charity? Do you see that?
Sure thing. So Larry Allen is asking, can you be infected with multiple variants, or does the Delta variant mutate other variants in a person's body?
That's a two-part question, Larry. I saw that question earlier. I'm going to do it very quickly for time's sake. Number one, yes, you can be infected with more than one variant at one time, because remember, it just matters on who you come into contact with and who put it out in the air for you to inhale. So if you encountered someone that had the Lambda variant, and you also were in a room with someone that had the Delta variant, and all of you were out singing and partying, and they put both of them out in the air, your ability to inhale both of them at the same time, that could happen. So theoretically, yes. Now, as I mentioned before, Delta has crowded out the majority of other variants. So we know that nowadays people are probably going to get infected with Delta. Now, the third part of that reply, that for people who are immunocompromised, we have found people where the mutations have occurred within one individual over and over and over and over and over again within one single person. And so that's why we want to shut down the transmission, because we know every time it transmits to another individual, it may find out something more about the human body that makes it easier for it to, number one, replicate, and then easier for it to transmit to other people. And so, but it's unlikely that it's going to mutate enough that quickly in your body if you don't fall in that category, for you to then turn out and you're going to start generating your own variant that now Ms. Edwards and I have to worry about and go and contact the World Health Organization. That's probably not going to occur in that fashion.
That's a good question, though. Yeah, thanks for asking that, Larry. Appreciate that. I see a question from Patricia, and she's asking, is the vaccine effective in preventing long COVID if you do become infected after being vaccinated?
Ms. Edwards, I'm happy to answer. I don't want to take any thunder.
No, I think you should answer that,
Okay.
because I'm actually curious about it. Now, I've anecdotally heard that people who had what they call long COVID before they were vaccinated experienced more of a relief in symptoms once the vaccine became available and they received it. So I'm interested in the flip, in the reverse.
Okay, so here's what we know according to the available science that we have today. We do believe that people who are vaccinated have a far less chance of having long COVID than if you were unvaccinated. That's number one. Number two, Ms. Edwards is exactly correct. I remember when the case report came out, it came out from California about individuals who had long COVID, and then the vaccine came out, we vaccinated them, and then they had an attenuation and somewhat of an alleviation of their symptoms. Now, it didn't completely take everything away, but it did seem to improve the majority of people, with the exception of people that got fibrosis of the lung. We haven't found that to be the case yet. And so, again, I want to go back to the presentation from Ms. Edwards. What we need and the way that we hope and believe that we can prevent long COVID from occurring is to have the antibodies waiting in your body should you come into contact with it to prevent that attachment. There is not enough zinc, vitamin D, vitamin C, airborne, elderberry, or anything else that you could probably come up with that will prevent that attachment of the virus to your internal organs. The only thing that we have found that can prevent the attachment are antibodies, okay? And rather than wait for you to become infected, because remember, by the time you realize you're infected, it's already been replicating for 3 to 5 days. And then try and go and scramble to get monoclonal antibodies to treat it at that point. We want people to get vaccinated so you have your antibodies already waiting. But now there are a few cases out there of people that were vaccinated that actually have persistent and now what we call long COVID symptoms, but pretty rare and a far less chance of it happening if you are already vaccinated.
Thank you for that question. Charity, do you want to look at another question and pose it?
Yes, I believe this might be our last question so far. It is from Janice Colquitt. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. How long can the virus stay attached to a face mask? That is very interesting. I see people leaving masks in their cars and reusing without washing or reusing a disposable mask. I see people pulling masks up and touching it with their hands, and it makes me wonder if they're spreading the virus.
Yes, possibly. So we know that COVID can stay on fabrics for a couple days, longer on plastics and metals. We do encourage people to try to not touch the mask with your hands without being sanitized, the same way that we tell kids to avoid wiping their eyes, because that's how you introduce basically anything into your body. Also, you know, outside of COVID, there are other things that are still circulating, normal bacteria and things in the air that, you know, a lot of people complain about, you know, the acne, or they get rashes on their faces because, you know, one thing that's probably more populous than people are, you know, bacteria and viruses that are circulating around. So, you know, besides just COVID, it's probably a good idea to dispose of disposable masks. And if you're using other types of masks that are washable, to go ahead and routinely wash those masks, because it can stay on there for some time. And you just want to make sure you just use a good practice of washing your hands and trying to avoid touching your mouth or your eyes or your nose or areas where you can introduce the virus into it without clean hands.
Thank you for that. And I've got two questions that I really wanted to get to also, if that's okay. They're very timely as well. Do you think it'll be necessary to get annual boosters to maintain the level of antibodies in our bodies to fight off coronavirus? And then also, I think it kind of goes along with this. Can you talk about the relative effectiveness of the different mix and match vaccine and boosters? Because that's a question I had too. So we're into the booster area. Yeah, what do you think about getting annual boosters? Is that going to just be part of our norm, do you think?
Right now, I'm going to say too early to tell. It's looking very likely. It all depends on the amount of circulating virus that we have going on in the community. Now, we believe that we missed an opportunity to achieve herd immunity and probably knock the levels down to a point that it will be more manageable. So it's probably going to become what we call endemic, meaning it will just become part of the viruses that we have to learn to live with. And so we probably are going to wind up needing either an annual booster, or if it mutates into something different, we will get an updated version. And again, the magic of the mRNA vaccine is that we can tailor it to the most dangerous version of this particular virus. Okay, we can change the formulation to the most dangerous version of the virus, and we can do that relatively quickly. We don't have to wait a year or two for that to occur. So it is looking like we are going to need what I call either updates or boosters, one or both, to combat what is probably just going to be part of circulating virus in our communities. Very quickly, because I know I'm going to have to run here in a moment, and then I'm going to turn it over to Miss Edwards, and you're gonna bring us home. But on the mix and match, let me just share all the information with you, because I've been tracking that all year long, and here in 2021 through a lot of publications from around the world. What we found is that, and it initially started with the Johnson & Johnson and/or overseas, the AstraZeneca vaccine, which are very similar to each other. And when people were given either the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine after that, it produced a very, very robust amount of antibodies. And people said, hey, that's a very good thing. And then they went back and checked the quality of the antibodies, and they found them to be a very good quality antibody. And then a third thing happened. The NIH, they actually did a clinical trial where they took people that had Moderna, Pfizer, or Johnson & Johnson as their initial vaccine dose and series. And then they broke them into 3 parts, and they gave everybody the other 3. So if you had Johnson & Johnson first, They had a group of 50 that got Johnson & Johnson, a group of 50 that got Moderna, a group of 50 that got Pfizer. And the outcome showed that, again, extremely good, robust response. And if you had Johnson & Johnson initially, and you got the Pfizer, you had about a 35% increase in the number of antibodies. If you had Johnson & Johnson and you got the full dose of Moderna, meaning the 100 microgram, you had a 75% increase in antibodies. Now, and I'm going to turn it over to Charlene because I apologize. I have to run for a very important event, but there's a big difference between a third dose and a booster. And Moderna has the biggest difference. So if you get a booster with Moderna because you fall into one of the categories of being immunocompromised or one of those special categories, they're going to give you the full dose. But if you get a third dose, they're going to cut the dose in half from 100 micrograms all the way down to 50 micrograms, which is still going to give you a very good response. It will help stretch it further, but otherwise you're going to get the very same dose for either Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson as your either second or third dose. But I have to run. I apologize. I just cannot thank you all enough for the invitation to come here. Ms. Edwards, I'm sure that we are going to encounter each other more and more out in the community. I look forward to working with you all. And please, if we have an opportunity to provide an update in the future, please let me know, and we'll be happy to come back on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sneed. We really appreciate you. We know that you have to run, so thank you again for being here.
Thank you all very much.
Wonderful. No, that was great. And I think, let me see if we've got some more questions. No, Anne-Marie. Okay. Our executive director, Anne-Marie, would like to know, will it be likely necessary for annual updates or boosters, but that will be contingent upon circulating virus levels? Okay, that's what Kevin was saying to Anne-Marie. That's great. Did we cover everybody else's questions? Did we get?
There was a question in the Q&A that I answered, and I just wanted to read it out loud in case anyone else had a similar question. It says, are private physicians required to report positive cases to the health department or the CDC? And the answer is yes. Any provider that's offering COVID-19 testing and any labs performing COVID-19 testing are required to report positive results to the Department of Health. So that's how we track the disease. In some cases, if they are a PCR, that's how we're able to enumerate the number of Delta circulating. And so, yes, that ultimately gets reported to the Center for Disease Control.
Thank you for answering that, Charlene. I think that we've been able to answer everyone else's questions. Want to thank you, Charlene, for being here. Charity, do you have some last words that you would like to share before Charlene goes?
I just wanted to thank you, Charlene, so much for your participation. We really enjoyed your public health perspective in all of this. Just you and Dr. Sneed really complemented each other well, and we appreciate your willingness to come out. I'm going to segue into speaking a little bit more about our vaccine outreach program, but you're free to stay or leave, however your schedule sees fit.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Charlene, so much.
So just to elaborate a little bit, this webinar was really birthed out of the overflow of our vaccine outreach efforts. And the purpose of our vaccine outreach program at AAAPP is to provide access to seniors who are 60 and above, as well as their caregivers who could be any age, who would like to be vaccinated, but have been otherwise prevented from doing so for various reasons, of course. For example, in the case of a homebound senior, this could be because they're just unable to get out of the house for various reasons. So we're able to coordinate services so that they're able to get their vaccine or booster shot at home. Or in the case of a caregiver who just has a lot on their plate, serving their loved one, we're able to coordinate services so that they can get respite care for their loved one and they can take some time to get vaccinated. So we're very thrilled about some of the success that we've had throughout the duration of the program. And I'll allow Stacy to speak more to that if time permits.
Just real quickly, I know that we had a story shared with us the other day from one of our colleagues, and it was regarding a woman's husband who was homebound and how difficult it was for him to get the vaccines initially because they had to arrange for transportation to the site. And that was kind of a laborious process with working with their insurance company. And then when she learned that we were able to provide in-home services and coordinate those services for her husband, it just took a lot off of her mind and her plate to know that for the booster shots that we can work with our vendor partners to make sure that when a senior who is homebound is able to receive that at home, and so they don't have to go through those extra hoops to receive the care that they need. And so it's great to have a program that it just eliminates those barriers that were there previously. And I think that's just one of the biggest takeaways from having this ability to have this outreach, to have the services that we can provide for free, and just to make this a little bit easier for our seniors.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that testimonial, Stacy. Very quickly, I'm going to share my screen. Here are our contacts for our vaccine outreach program. As you can see, Stacy and I are listed. We are more than happy to do an in-person or virtual presentation for your community group, 55 plus community, church, etc., regarding our vaccine outreach program. We also have Corinna Powers, who is our star player in all of this. She's our vaccine access helpline care coordinator, who is probably on this webinar right now. If you need, if you would like access to our services regarding the vaccine outreach program, you can definitely call her. This is her direct line. Please be on the lookout for any additional information on our website and social media outlets. You can always follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Aging Care FL. And just thank you. Thank you so much for participating. I know we ran a little over, so we appreciate your patience with us.
Yes, yes, we do. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Charity. Hope you have a wonderful Friday and happy Halloween. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Have some coffee.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.